I want to begin by acknowledging the sponsors, the sponsor for tonight's Shiur. Thank you very much, Yishar Kochech, to Beverly Fromer, who is sponsoring in commemoration of the Yahrzeit of her mom, Claire Fromer Zichronah Livracha. May she and extended family be blessed with long life and good health. And I also want to acknowledge at the beginning the presence tonight of Ralph and Kitty Wintrop, who had a very, very difficult week following the passing of their son-in-law, Peter Meze. So I wish Ralph and Kitty and Suzanne and the entire family long life and good health, and may Hashem comfort all of you amongst the other mourners of Zion and Yerushalayim. We're in the middle of the Pesach story, and don't get scared. It doesn't mean Pesach is around the corner, so it's a leap year this year, so everybody can take a deep breath, because it means there's an extra period of time before Pesach starts. But believe it or not, I'm going to say this, and I know my wife is on the line. I hope she's not upset. She's already begun sort of calculating what we should be eating up now, because Pesach is coming. So we're already in the pre-Pesach Chametz awareness zone. And it's, wow, in my mind, the Yamim Noraim are just over. We just took down the sukkah. That's how I'm thinking, although it's not exactly true. But be that as it may, we are in the midst of a very dramatic and exciting narrative, which forms, of course, our Pesach celebration. So our Parshat Hashavua is Parshat Bo. So with your permission, let's get right into it. And we're going to start towards the beginning of Parshat Bo. So Parshat Bo, the previous Parsha, concludes with the Makkah of Barad of hail, and this Parsha begins with the onset of the Makkah of Arbe, of locusts. So the Torah tells us, I'm starting Pasuk Gimel, chapter 10, Pasuk 3. ויבוא משה ואהרון אל פרעה ויאמרו אליו כה אמר השם אלוקי העברים עד מתי מאנת לענות מפני שלח עמי ועבדוני. Moshe and Aaron came to Pharaoh and said, so said Hashem, God of the Hebrews, until when will you refuse to be humble before me? Send out my people that they may serve me. Because if you continue to refuse to let my people go, then tomorrow I will bring locusts within the borders of Egypt. It will be so thick, the onset of this cloud of locusts will be so thick that you won't actually be able to see the land. It'll be like this black cloud descending on the country. And whatever the previous Makkah of Barad hail left in the field, Arbet will decimate. And they will eat whatever trees, whatever vegetation. There will be nothing on the land. So essentially, of course, what they're being threatened with is starvation. There will be nothing to eat. And this is going to be epic. It's going to be historic. It's going to be of proportions never before seen. This onset of Arbet will be of a dimension that can't even possibly be imagined and has never happened in the annals of Egyptian history. And Pasuk Vav ends, Vayifen Vayetze Me'im Paro. And he turns and they leave Paro's presence. Now that phrase, and he turns and he leaves Paro's presence, again, within the context of a narrative, what does it add to the story? The important part of this encounter, this interaction, is what Moshe and Aaron had to convey to Pharaoh. Of course, after they conveyed it, we intelligent readers would assume that Aaron and Moshe leave. Yet the Torah insists, it says, no, you have to understand, they gave the message and then they turned and they left. So again, using the lens of rabbinic interpretation, details that normally seem to be inconsequential or don't contribute much to an understanding of the narrative usually don't find their way into the Torah text. So when you do have information that seems to be unnecessary, it's usually a sign for the Chachamim to stop and to explore. So Rav Moshe ben Nachman, Ramban, adds a fascinating insight here. And I'm going to just read with you a little bit. So the Ramban, explaining the importance of this last phrase, that he turned and he left Paro's presence, says the following: Bavur shepachadu ma'od babarad, that the Egyptians were petrified. They were petrified at the previous Makkah of Barad. Chashav Moshe shivchadu gam ata sheyamutu bara'av. Moshe thought, he knew, he understood that the way he's describing the onset of the locusts, that if they were afraid before, this is going to scare them even more. Now they're going to be afraid that they're going to die of starvation. There'll be nothing to eat. Whatever Barad may have left in the country is now going to be totally decimated, and an entire civilization is going to starve. V'yatsa bilo rishuto terem she'anuhu hein olo. And Moshe deliberately, you can just imagine the drama. You can just imagine the scene in your mind. And I think one should. I think that's the whole point of some of these details. You can just imagine Moshe and Aaron standing there in Paro, and all the servants and the inner court of Paro's entourage are standing there. And Moshe delivers this dramatic warning: if you don't let my people go, then there'll be locusts. There'll be nothing left to eat. And at the moment, he knows what's going on in their mind. He knows. Moshe understands that they are scared. He understands that they're scared, but he's using this to his advantage. Now, you might think that if you got them against the ropes, if you got them scared, play it out, Moshe. Play it out. Just stand there nonchalant. Wait, because they're going to capitulate. But Moshe leaves, and he doesn't even ask for shoot. He doesn't ask permission. He may be in the presence of the king, and in the past, he deferred, and he still gave kavod to the king. He did, knowing, of course, that he's not really the king who thinks himself a god. But nonetheless, Moshe was willing to give kavod to the position of royalty in the monarchy, but not here. He didn't ask for shoot. He just turned his back and he walked out. But why? And here the Ramban adds a very interesting insight. And it's not just an insight, I think, about what happened then in the text. I think it's an insight about human nature. So again, v'yatsa bilo rishuto terem she'anuhu hein olo. And he turns around and he leaves before he even had permission. He wasn't even waiting for the answer. Yes, we'll let them go. No, we're not. He walks out. Why? Listen to these three words: kedei sheyitya'atsu b'davar, which literally means in order for the Egyptians to speak amongst themselves on the matter. Moshe knew what he was doing. He wanted to leave because what he was planning on doing was having them all start talking and arguing and conversing and discussing with each other. And he knew that was going to happen. And so he turns around and he walks out. But why? Why was that a better suggestion? Why is that a better strategy? Why not wait? Why not wait? Why not wait and see how they're squirming and be there and sort of get a little bit of nachas? You know, I got them on the ropes. I really said something that's scaring them. But he walks out according to the Rambam. Rav Simcha Zissel Broidi was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva Hebron and the author of a commentary on Torah called Sam Derech. And he suggests that this Ramban, actually those three words, Kedei she'yatsu b'davar, so that they would have a chance to take counsel and converse and discuss, is an insightful observation about the nature of human psychology, which is what? Moshe didn't want to be there because what Moshe wanted to happen was for them to come to the decision to let the Jewish people go on their own. And he didn't want his presence there. He didn't want to influence this decision in any way. But even beyond that, I think what Simcha Zissel Brady is suggesting, the Ramban may be implying, isn't part of human nature, which is, don't tell me what to do. Don't you tell me what to do. I'm going to decide for myself. And Moshe may have understood this. And Moshe may have understood that even at a time of a critical time, where the consequences of a decision could be life-threatening, nonetheless, people sometimes decide, it's my life, I'm making the decision. Don't tell me what to do. So maybe using some language that many of us are familiar with now, don't tell me to get a vaccination. Don't tell me what to do. It's my choice. Don't tell me what's good for me, okay? It's me, my life, I will decide for myself. Don't tell me, Moshe, what we should be doing. Don't tell me what's good for us. So Moshe understood that there's that aspect of people that they don't want to be told what to do. And so according to Rabbi Simcha Zissel Brody, that was behind Moshe's Vayifin Vayetze. He knew that they were scared. He knew that they were thinking, what are we going to eat? There's not going to be any food left after Barod destroyed what's in the field, and whatever's left, whatever little food we're going to have to ration throughout the entire Egyptian countryside is going to be gone. So let's capitulate. Talk amongst yourselves. Come to a decision on your own. Any decision that people make on their own is probably better than a decision forced by some sort of outside influence or power. If you're invested in the decision, likely you're going to take it more seriously. And so therefore, says the Rambam, Vayifin Vayetze. He turned around and he walked out. Why? To leave it up to them to make the decision. The Torah goes on to tell us in this chapter, just a couple of verses later, that of course they left, as we just read at the end of Pasuk 6. Pasuk Zayin, Vayomru avdei Paro elav, Ad matai yezeh lanu lemokeh, Shalach et anashim v'yavdu et Hashem Elokehem, Haterem teda ki avda Mitzrayim. Which means Paro's servant said to Paro, how long will this be a snare for us? Send out the men that they may serve Hashem, their God. Do you not yet know that Egypt is lost? So you can just now see what's going on. Moshe was right. This pasuk, in fact, proves, according to the Ramban, that his strategy is working. Moshe leaves, and behind the scenes, there's this inner conflict now. The servants of Paro are turning to his majesty, the monarch, the God figure, and say, what are you doing? You're killing us. How long are you going to hang on to this crazy hatred of yours? Just let them go. Their lives are more important than our Egyptian lives. Let the Jews go. Pasuk Chet. Vayushav et Moshe ve'et Aharon el Paro vayomer Elihem. So Moshe and Aharon were returned to Paro. They brought them back. Paro said, all right, bring them back. And they come back. Vayomer Elihem. And he, Paro, says to Moshe and Aharon, Lechu ivdu et Hashem Elokechem mi vami haholchim. Go and serve Hashem, your God. Which ones are going? Meaning, who are you taking with you? So first it says you can go, and who are you taking with you? It's those last three words of this pasuk that we're just going to pause and explore for a minute. Mi vami haholchim. It's an interesting phrase. The double mi vami is interesting. It would have been sufficient had Paro simply said mi holchim. Who's going? But mi vami. So as the Midrash does, again, as we've said in the past, the Midrash is a rabbinic response to the Torah. And there's two types of Midrash. There's that Midrash which explicates and expounds on the mitzvot in the Torah. So that's called Midrash Halakha. And there's Midrash Agadah, which is the rabbinic response to the ideas that seem to be emerging, the moral messages. And sometimes the Chachamim themselves had ideas that were valuable, and they sought to ground those ideas in aspects or stories or narratives or words or phrases in the Torah. So there's a midrash on these two words, mi vami haholchim. And the author of the midrash reads the words mi vami haholchim, and the double mi, And he suggests something interesting. He suggests, that doubling of the word mi v'mi holchim reminds, says the author of the Midrash, of another part of our Tanakh in which we have this doubling of the word me and me, but not one after the other, but in close proximity to each other. And it's actually a verse in Tehillim. Mi ya'aleh bahar Hashem, u'mi yakum bimkom kadsho. Who will ascend the mountain of God, and who will stand in the place of holiness? Now, let's be clear. Paro is not quoting sacred Tehillim for a whole variety of reasons, which doesn't make sense. It's not possible. But the author of this midrash is suggesting that the doubling of the word mi v'mi can be reminding us of this pasuk. In what way? How does that help us? Rav Ben Zion Menachem Zaks, who was a rabbi, a Chicago Rav before he made Elliott, I believe he's the son-in-law of a former chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, Tzvi Pesach Frank, has a series of comments that he put together on Chumash called Menachem Zion. And he suggests a very interesting idea. He says, obviously, the Torah is telling us that there is a conversation of some sort that is unfolding in front of us. We're reading the verses between Moshe and Aharon. Now, the Torah is giving us the tamtzit, the essence of the conversation. But what the Torah is telling us can be sort of unpacked and expanded upon. So when Paro turns to Moshe and he says, Mi v'mi ha'holchim, the author of the Midrash is suggesting that Paro's response represents not just the words that he said to Moshe and Aharon, but represents a hashkafa, a perspective. Mi ya'aleh bahar Hashem, u'mi yakum bimkom kodsho. Says the Midrash, the author of the Midrash, what's being presented to Moshe is this. Moshe, you've been, and I'm speaking now as Paro, you've been asking me to let your people go so you can serve your God. Mi v'mi ha'holchim. But in serving your God, the way you're describing it, do you really think that you're emancipating your nation? Do you really think that by letting them leave Egypt and allowing them to serve God in the manner in which you've described to me, do you think that that's a process of liberation? No, that's not a process of liberation. That's a process of enslavement. The amount of obligation and the amount of ritual and the amount of ritual observances and encumbrances and precepts that your religious undertakings are going to place on the people is worse than what I'm doing. If you think they're slaves with me here in Egypt, at least they have this freedom of religion. Now that they're going to be leaving, you're just going to be replacing the slavery that they have here, the servitude, with a whole other level. Oh my gosh, who's going to stand on the hot mountain of God? Who's going to stand in the holy places? Nobody can stand there. What you're asking of your people, suggests Rabbi Ben Zion Zaks, through the language here, what you're suggesting is really an unacceptable and perhaps even unlivable sort of servitude. Mi v'mi ha'holchim. That's what you want for the people? No. You know what? I don't think you have a right vision of what your people need. It's an interesting idea, but of course this midrash is not really just talking about Moshe and Paro. What this midrash is doing, I think, is using this particular interaction between these two characters, well, between Moshe Rabbeinu and Paro, to externalize a question that many of us are talking about, or we're thinking about. This is a story of liberation. This is a story of slavery. So is this really a story of liberation? Oh my God. Is leaving Mitzrayim and then having to live all of these requirements a type of liberation? Is this easy? Oh my gosh, how do you walk into this? How do we consider this to be a life that we want to cherish? It's hard. And so, of course, the Midrash is really, in some ways, giving voice to what maybe some of us are thinking quietly. But our Chachamim are so bold. They are fearless. They're not even afraid of articulating this idea. Now, today, if you were to say this in a yeshiva, in certain yeshivas, you get just face slapped. Why? But how can you ask a question like this and question God? Our Chachamim are not afraid of it. This is what this Midrash is saying. This Midrash is questioning God. You think that the religion that you want to heap on us is a form of enriched life? Not at all. This is slavery. So Moshe's answer is also as instructive as Paro's question. So let's read Moshe's answer. Vayomer Moshe, b'na'areinu u'v'zkenenu nelech b'banenu u'v'bnotenu b'tzonenu u'v'vkarenu nelech ki chag Hashem lanu. So Moshe answers, with our youngsters and with our elders we shall go, with our sons and with our daughters, with our flock and with our cattle shall we go, because it's a festival of Hashem for us. So Rabbi Zaks says Moshe's answer is important. So just think again. I'm going to read it one more time. Moshe's answer is b'na'areinu v'zkenenu nelech. With our youth, with our youngsters, and with our elders. It's interesting the order that Moshe uses. Normally, in the way in which we conduct our lives, in the way in which we teach our children to give deference, to give respect, to give kavod to the elders. Mipnei seva takum, we should rise. So why is Moshe putting the na'arim before the zikenim? Why doesn't he say it the other way? Bizkenenu b'na'areinu nelech. No, we're going to go with the zikenim because those are the ones who we honor, the ones who were older, the ones who were wiser. Yes, they'll go first and then we'll all follow. They're going to be giving us the Masorah. Moshe doesn't do that. He reverses the order. Says the Menachem Tzion in his comment. So if Paro's attack, if Paro's question is that your religion really is too difficult to bear, Moshe's answer is no, you're wrong. It may be too difficult to bear if it is only accepted in old age. But if we begin to endear this into the hearts and minds of our children, and they grow up in it, and they see from a young age just how enriching it can be, even with all the expectations, then it's not an encumbrance. It's not an imposition. It won't be seen as something that we want to throw and cast off. It will be embraced. It's true. Go to tell an adult, okay, now keep Shabbos. When you're 38 years old, 40, you've never kept Shabbos. It takes a while to get used to that. That's not an easy sort of thing. Or kashrut, or what are the other mitzvot in the Torah? But if you grew up with it as a young child, and you had a Shabbos table where everybody was sitting and singing and enjoying and talking and eating and playing and sharing divrei Torah, then it's much, much sweeter, and it's no longer as difficult. So therefore, says Rabbi Zaks, that's Moshe's answer to the question. And so again, this Midrash, as I said a minute ago, is not really just about Moshe and about Paro. It's about all of us who are sometimes wondering, oh my gosh, this is crazy. What a crazy religion. Oh my gosh, we got to put the sukkah up, put the sukkah down, clean out your kitchen. Oh my gosh, who can manage this? But we've been doing it since we're little children for many of us. And so while it may not be quote unquote simple, in some ways you could imagine your life without it, because it means something to you that has an emotional impact, that brings you a certain sense of spiritual satisfaction. And that, says Rabbi Zaks, was Moshe's answer to that. Okay, I want to go a little bit further. Still staying in this section, there's so much Torah. I mean, you can only imagine. This is the Pesach story. And by the way, I just want to mention something to you. You're sitting at your Pesach Seder, and you read the Haggadah, that's true, but you're wondering of what else to add. add the stuff that we're talking about. This is the Pesach story. So if you're looking for a Dvar Torah at your Pesach table, these things are exactly what you should be speaking about. These are the Divrei Torah that matter, I think. I mean, they're important to me. Maybe some of these ideas mean something to you. So maybe make a note of some of these things and speak about them at your Pesach Seder. So Pasuk 10. We just finished 9, Pasuk 10. Vayomer Alehem, Yehi Chen Hashem imachem, Ka'asher ashalach etchem ve'etavchem ru'u ki ra'a neged pneichem. So Paro, he said to them, Moshe and Paro were having this interchange, and now Paro is responding to Moshe's comment. We're going to go with our youth, with our elderly. Okay. So Paro says, so be Hashem with you as I will send you forth with your children. Look, the evil intent is opposite your faces. What an odd phrase. Ki ra'a neged pneichem. What exactly does that mean is the topic, as you can imagine, amongst the Meforshim. And I want to share with you now an explanation by Rav Levi ben Gershon, otherwise known Gershonides, as he has his explanation. So the Ralbag explains Paro's comment that God of Israel is a God of Ra'ah. Your God is an evil God. Is an evil God. He's evil and he's destructive. So Paro may be conceding that the 7 makot that preceded, which descended upon him, descended upon Mitzrayim, descended upon the entire country, were the manifestations of a divine force. It's true. Okay, I accept it. That all the makot came from your God. True. But the God who caused all of these makot in this widespread devastation is capable of only that. Your God is capable of only wreaking havoc and destruction and suffering on lives of people, of communities, and of property. And Paro felt very self-righteous. And he, in some ways, plays an amazing role. He plays the role of the compassionate defender of the Nebuch, Israelite children. Oh my gosh, somebody's got to look out for their welfare. Apparently it's not you, Moshe. Your God, what does he do? He just hurts people. So who's going to take care of your children? Look, everything that we've seen in this country that your God did is painful. So we have every reason to believe that that's going to be going forward as well. Not just on us, but maybe even on your own children. And so Paro then, as I said, self-righteously wants to protect the Jewish children, refusing to let them leave his protection and to be exposed to the danger of Moshe and Aharon's God. And so therefore, Paro says, Ki ra'a neged pneichem. There is evil before you. There is evil before you. Like he's saying, what? If you're planning to go serve this God of yours that you've been talking to me about, I can't possibly allow you to take these little young Nebuch children who are so vulnerable to go with you because of what your God must for sure have in store for them. Interesting idea. Meaning that according to the Ralbag, the perception of God, certainly in the mind of Paro, was that God is a powerful God, but so far, all that he's done is to cause pain and suffering. And so you wonder whether, in fact, not only might Paro be thinking that, is it possible that all of the people, including the Jews, might have been wondering about that too? Is it maybe possible that Bnei Israel had some internal doubts? Wow. You know, we've been watching each month, there's a new makkah, there's a new pain, there's a new inflicted suffering that's overcoming all of our neighbors, their Egyptian neighbors. It's true. And the Ralbag actually says that. The Ralbag says that some of the Jewish people, some of Bnei Israel were indeed worried. They were scared that the God whom they were leaving to serve is capable of only doing bad things. They were afraid. So it's interesting, the Ralbag says it's because of this fear that there's a story that happens a little later on unfolds. So what's the story? So Bnei Israel cross Yamsu. Of course, that's Parshat Bishalach. And so immediately after Bnei Israel cross Yamsu. So what's Yamsu? Well, you know what it is. It's the crossing of the Red Sea. And what happens there? Well, the entire Egyptian cavalry drowns. So the last act that they see God perform is an act, connected to the Exodus, is an act yet again of destruction. Now, of course, they felt relieved that they were saved, but they may still have wondered, wow, we're saved, but what's in store for us now? Can this God actually do other things? So the Torah tells us right after that, they had a 3 days journey. Vayavo Marata, they came to a place called Marah. And why was the place called Marah? Because the waters there, Kimarimhim, were all bitter. Do you remember the story? And so Hashem tells Moshe to take this piece of wood, to throw it in the well, which had bitter water, and the well water becomes sweetened. So obviously the story is important because it's a way in which Hashem was able to give sweet, fresh water to quench the thirst of the Jewish people. But it's not insignificant, says the Ralbag, that that's the first recorded act that Hashem does for Bnei Israel following Kriyat Yamsuf. Why? Because it's an act of sweetness. To demonstrate, says the Ralbag, that all the things that they had witnessed in Egypt up until then, all the makot and all the pain and all the suffering, those things were part of what God is capable of doing. But to respond to the questions that others had, is this God capable of doing anything positive, sweet, tender, gentle, loving, embracing? And the answer to that is yes. And that's why that story is like the first non-destructive incident that happens right after Kriyat Yamsuf. And so right from the outset, God wanted to show Bnei Israel that he did punish the oppressors, but he's equally capable of showing love and caring for the Jewish people. So the Ralbag's answer to Kira'ah Neged Pneikem was that Paro was presenting himself as a thoughtful, considerate man who was worried about the vengeful, evil, destructive face of the God of the Jews. I'm going to move from Perek Yud to Perek Yud Aleph. And Perek Yud Aleph introduces the final Makkah, which of course is, as we know, Makat Yechorot. And it begins, this Perek begins this way: Vayomer Shem Moshe od nega echad avi al paro va'al Mitzrayim acharei chen yishalach etchem mizeh kishalcho kala garashi garesh etchem mizeh. One more plague shall I bring upon Paro and upon Egypt. After that he shall send you forth from here, and when he sends you forth, it shall be complete. He shall drive you out of here. One more makkah, and then this whole episode will come to a halt. The Berna Boznei Am Vishalu Ish Me'et Re'ehu Isha Me'et Re'uta Kle Kesef Kle Zahav. Please speak in the ears of the people. Let each man request of his fellow, and each woman from her fellow, silver vessels of gold and gold vessels. And then Pasuk Gimel. Vayten Hashem et chen ha'am be'inei Mitzrayim, gam ha'ish Moshe gadol me'od be'eretz Mitzrayim, be'inei avdei Paro, uve'inei ha'am. Hashem granted the people favor in the eyes of Egypt. Moreover, the man Moshe was very great in the land of Egypt, in the eyes of the servants of Paro, avdei Paro, and in the eyes of the people, uve'inei ha'am. Meshech Chochmah, who we've quoted from time to time in our Parshat Shiur, has an interesting observation about this last phrase, that Moshe was held in high esteem by whom? Avdei Paro and Be'enei Ha'am. So again, every time we find details and descriptions, the traditional rabbinic interpretation is why. Meaning, Avdei Paro and Be'enei Ha'am are not the same. And if it just said Be'enei Ha'am, would we as readers have even stopped to think about that? Okay, everybody in Egypt held Moshe in high esteem. But it doesn't just say Be'enei Ha'am, does it? It says Avdei Paro and Be'enei Ha'am. And so the Meshech Chochmah says that's a significant addition. And the Meshech Chochmah develops this idea. He says that the Torah wanted to draw our attention to the order in which Moshe earned the esteem of the Egyptians. First, it says Avdei Paro, Paro's servants, and then it says the nation at large. The order is significant, says the Meshech Chochmah, and he explains why. And he says there are two ways for people to earn popularity and esteem. The more, I guess he would call this the more genuine way, the more authentic way, which is the way that real, truly great and worthy people rise to the elite status of society. Which way is that? It's by first appealing to the wise and scholarly members of society. And those are the people who are capable of identifying talent and virtue. And then this, I guess, elite group who come to appreciate and value and hold somebody in esteem, this group uses their influence as the status group to influence and share that esteem with other members of society. Gradually. So according to the Meshech Chochmah, this way, the individual in question gradually earns admiration of everybody, but not all at once. It happens through a top-down movement. That's how it's happening. The elite in society begin to value and to talk about and post and repost and write about and social media. And somehow, because the intelligentsia begins to talk about it, the Hamon Am, the average person on the street, begins to take notice. And over a period of time, the person about whom these posts are being written gains stature and status. But there's another way, says the Meshech Chochmah, for a person to rise in status in a organization or a society. And what's the other way? So the other way, he maintains, might be easier, and it might actually be somewhat faster, but it's less genuine, and unfortunately, probably much more common. And what is that? And that's by a populist movement. It's planting the seeds not in the intelligentsia, but at the other spectrum of society. It's populist, and it's earning the favor and admiration of the masses, those who may not be so discerning, those who may not be so careful in thinking things through, those who are willing to accept simple-minded stories without really checking and wondering whether there's any basis to them. But be that as it may, this strategy of rhetoric and maybe even propaganda works. And if the Meshech Chochmah is talking about Eretz Mitzrayim and how it might have happened for Moshe Rabbeinu, oh my goodness, I think it's certainly true now. Maybe even a woke culture, we understand how things spread, and not necessarily from the direction from top down, clearly from the bottom up. So the person's popularity amongst the masses will then impact the leaders and the scholarly elite, who might have no choice but to embrace the individual, because it's sometimes hard to stand up against the masses. This is what the people are pushing. This is the person the people want. This is the tweets and the posts and the Facebook or Meta, whatever it's now called, all that social media, it's hard to take a stand back and say, yes, but you're not looking at the facts. It's not. This tsunami of public opinion sometimes determines what happens, not critical reflection. So people who rise to high esteem in this fashion often would maintain the Meshech Chochmah, are people of lesser substance who might be able to push the right emotional buttons. They may be good orators. They may have great rhetorical skills. They may have a sense of the pulse of the people, and they move things in a direction that may be in their own benefit, that the masses would accept. And so therefore, in our pasuk, says the Meshech Chochmah, let's read it again. How is Moshe's status established here? First, the Torah tells us, Gadol me'od, Moshe gadol me'od be'eretz Mitzrayim. In whose eyes? Avdei Paro. This was Paro's entourage. These are the people who served him. These are the Chartumim. These are not the servants who are just bringing him like, bring me my food. These are the people who he talks to. These are the people who are informing a lot of the higher level decision making that's going on in the Egyptian culture, in the Egyptian community. So Meshech Chochmah says that's how Moshe got to be Moshe, at least in the eyes of the Egyptians, not because of the other way around, but because of this. Paro's servants, the king's esteemed advisors, first understood the status of Moshe, and only then Moshe's status rose amongst the people. He was recognized as a person of greatness by those who were knowledgeable, intelligent, and discerning enough to recognize true greatness. And only then that greatness spread to the masses. Okay. The beginning of Perek Yud Aleph, which we're in right now, the next pasuk, we just did pasuk Gimel. Let's take a look at pasuk Dalet. If you're looking in the Chumash, if not, as you know, I read it and translate. Vayomer Moshe, Ko Amar Hashem, Kachatzot halayla ani yotzei b'toch Mitzrayim. So Moshe, in the presence of Paro, this is the last series of discussions and interactions, turns to Paro and says, so said Hashem, at about midnight, I shall go out in the midst of Egypt. Every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Paro, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn of the maidservant who's behind the millstone, and all the firstborn of beast. Okay, let's stop. I want to go back to the Hebrew. The translation in this case is accurate in the, I think it's accurate in the Art Scroll. I'll read it one more time in Hebrew. Vayomer Moshe Ko Amar Hashem, this is what Hashem said, Kachatzot halayla ani yotzei. Kachatzot halayla. It does not say Bachatzot halayla. Bachatzot halayla would mean at midnight. But it's not Bachatzot halayla. Even though in the Haggadah, one of the Piyutim, we sing towards the very end, Vayihi Bachatzi halayla, we sort of make it reference that it was at midnight. But here, the Torah is not using the bet, it's using the kaf, vayi kachatzot halayla, which the translation is, it was about midnight. That's an odd, like, what is that? Like, God is not imprecise. God is not saying, oh my gosh, I forgot my iPhone and I'm not sure when midnight is. I'll try to get as close as I can. Like, God does not have that challenge. So why does it say kachatzot halayla, about midnight? So one of the answers given is that Hashem did not want Paro to sort of miscalculate and say, you said midnight, here's my calculation, your God can't do what he says, he's off by a minute. Hashem wanted to sort of remove any possibility of that sort of leg to stand on to not pay attention to the message of God. So there was no commitment exactly what time this makkah would befall the firstborn. It was just around. So if it's around, that's good enough. So Rashi quotes that. It's a statement of Chazal, but I want to share with you a fascinating explanation by Rochaim ben Attar in his commentary, the Or Chaim HaKadosh. So to understand the Or Chaim HaKadosh, you need to know that the Or Chaim HaKadosh does not translate this phrase, Ka Chatzot Halayla, as about midnight. No. He thinks that the letter Kaf at the beginning of the word Ka Chatzot actually is which would be the Kaf Hadimayon, which means what? It means it's a kaf that would be the first, a contraction of the word kmo. And maybe some of you who are familiar with Hebrew know that the word kmo means like, comparing one thing to the other. What do you mean comparing? Ka chatzot halayla, says Or Chaim HaKadosh. What Moshe was saying to Paro is, Paro, this night will be ka chatzot halayla, similar to another chatzot at midnight. Not an about, which was the first explanation, but this kaf is the contracted short form of the word kmo. That Moshe was turning to Paro and saying, Paro, this night is going to be like another night that happened. And you know what I'm talking about. What is he talking about? So the Or Chaim HaKadosh asks us to travel a little bit back in time, about 440 years back in time. From this dramatic moment of Moshe talking to Paro, we need to travel back about 440 years. What happens 440 years ago? 440 years ago is the story of Abraham and the war against the kings. So you may remember that there was a war between 4 kings and 5 kings. These 4 kings were powerful kings who subjugated the 5 kings who lived in Eretz Canaan, until such a time as the 5 kings could no longer take being subjugated and living in servitude to the powerful 4 kings, of whom the leader was Kedar LaOmer. I'm taking you back to Sefer Breshit, Parshat Lech Lecha, Perek Yudalit. You may remember, of course you do, that in that war between the 4 kings and the 5 kings, who was taken captive? Avram's nephew, Lot. Word got back to Abraham that Lot, his nephew, whom they separated from. So Lot was not living anymore with Abraham. And Lot, of course, we know the story of Lot who moved to Sodom and whatever moral sort of deterioration he underwent. We got it. But nonetheless, he was Avram's mishpacha. And when you hear your mishpacha is in trouble, you act, you do what you can. So when Avram found out that Lot was taken captive, he begins a campaign to fight. He undertakes a military campaign against the 4 kings, the powerful kings who defeated the 5 kings, and he goes to war. So I'm going to read now from Sefer Breshit. I'm going to go back into Perek Yudalid. And I'm reading Pasuk Yudalit, Perek Yudalit, Pasuk Yudalit. So bear with me. Vaishma Avram ki nishba achiv vayarek et chanichav yelidei beito shmuna asar ushlosh meot vayirdof adan. And when Avram heard that his kinsman, referring to Lot, was taken captive, he armed his disciples who had been born at his house, 318, and he pursued them as far as Dan. Okay, now listen to this next part. Vayechalek alehem laila, hu va'avadav vayakem vayirdefem ad chova asher mismol ladamesek. I'll read it in English. And he with his servants deployed against them at night. The Hebrew words are vayechalek alehem laila, hu va'avadav, and he pursued them as far as Chovah, which is to the north of Damascus. Okay, we're going to stop there. We know the end of the story, which is really not the point here. The point that I wanted to bring with me is the Or Chaim HaKadosh is bringing is Vayechalek Alehem Laila. Now, the translation that I shared with you from the Stone translation is Vayechalek, he with his servants deployed against them at night. Vayechalek Alehem Laila, meaning that Avram decided that even if it was night, he wasn't going to stop. He wasn't going to take a break. So he divided up. The word in Hebrew to divide is Vayechalek Alehem Laila. So he divided up his crew at night to continue the fight and to chase after the enemy even at night. Okay. So Rashi, on this pasuk in Sefer Breshit, Vayechalek Alehem Lefi Pshuto. Rashi says, yeah, that's what it means. It means he divided up his group and they continued the fight at night. And then Rashi says, but there's another explanation that I feel I need to bring to your attention, which is what? Umidrash Agada. But there's a midrash. Why is there another explanation? The other explanation is, well, the explanation I just gave you, which is the Rashi's first explanation and the explanation on which the translation is based, makes sense. But there's actually a textual difficulty with accepting it. What's the textual difficulty? Well, let's go back for those of you who are familiar with Hebrew. Vayechalek Alehem Laila. So if the meaning is he divided his army, then it shouldn't say Vayechalek Alehem. It should say Vayechalek Otam, an object. He divided them. He divided the group into multiple little mini groups to each chase people. That would have been the grammatically correct way of describing this. But that's not what the Torah says. It says, Vayechalek Alehem Laila. And the Midrash says, it's not that Avraham divided his group. That's not correct, because it doesn't say Vayechalek Otam. It says Vayechalek Alehem Laila. Not the group was divided, but the night was divided for them. Whoa. Vayechalek, just rearrange it. Vayechalek Laila Alehem. So reading the Rashi, this Midrash Agadah, fascinating Midrash. Shenechlak halayla, the night was divided. Uvechetzio harishon na'asalo nais. Yes, it was divided into two parts to the night. The first part of the night was the part of the night that Avram successfully beat the enemy. That was the first part of the night. Whatever number of hours, the first 4 hours of the night, he was able to do what he needed to do in 4 hours. The Chetzio Sheni. What about the second part of the night? The Torah says that the night was divided. V'chalek Alehem Laila. So you have two chalakim. You have two parts, two halves. So the first part was the part in which they successfully beat militarily. The second part, Midrash, which Rashi quotes, V'chetzio Hasheni, and the second half, Nishmar Uvalo Lachatzot Laila Shel Mitzrayim, which means what? During its first half, a miracle was wrought for him, Abraham, and the second half was kept and reserved for the miracle of the midnight in Egypt. Okay, what's going on here? This Rashi is basing on a midrash mentioned in a collection called Pirkei the Rabbi Eliezer, in which the night of the fight that took place between Avraham and the kings was what night? Yes, Tetvav Nisan, the night of the first night of Pesach. Vayachalek Alehem Laila, to be grammatically correct, the night was divided in two. But why do we need to divide the night in two? Because the first half, the first miraculous half, was to help Abraham But this night was endowed with miraculous qualities. And miraculous qualities are like a spiritual energy that just doesn't go away. Somehow, like the law of conservation of energy in the physical world, there's a law of conservation of energy in the world of miracles, in the world of the spirit. It wasn't dissipated. On that night of the Tedvav of Nisan, when Avram won the war in the first half of the night, the power of that night was saved, as it were. For when? It was saved for the 15th day of Nisan. The 15th day of Nisan. So what does that mean? Vayehi kachatzot. Vayehi, let's going back now to Parshat Bo. So whereas some people explained it meant kachatzot halayla means around midnight, Or Chaim says no. This was the other chatzot halayla. Just like Avraham, one guy with a small army was able to overcome and conquer what seemed to be an invincible army of kings which had ruled in the area for years and years and years, and everybody was certain no one could dominate them. Comes Avraham with God behind him or above him, and Avraham says, if Hashem wants it to happen, it will happen. And Moshe says to Paro, listen to this. And Or Chaim says, this went down in the history books of the time. It happened 440 years ago. But people had records. They had records. In Egypt, they had records of these wars of the area and of the region. And this was a super battle. This was the type of battle that went down in the records that they used to teach people about military strategy. This was a story for the ages of how Avraham defeated the kings, and it became legend. And so says Moshe, that's part of this people. Paro, that happened on this night, and I'm telling you now, the same result that happened then is going to happen to you and your people on this night. Tet Vav Nisan is a night of miracles for the Jewish people. And it's not Bachatzot Halayla, because according to the Or Chaim, it wasn't that message that Moshe was giving. It's not about midnight. It's about this night will be like that night, which was a night of a miracle, and a night in which the power of a miracle can never be extinguished and can't be dissipated. And so as we end on my Dvar Torah for tonight, that's something to consider. The power of the Spirit. We do believe, Jews do believe, that certain moments in time are endowed with power that goes well beyond their moment of origin. And Tisha B'Av, for example, is such a night. It's a night of sadness. Why? Because of the destruction of the second temple, the first temple. But that's a long time ago. And here we are in 2021, 2022. But we don't believe that. We don't believe it's just a moment in the past. We believe that whatever that tragic moment was, that energy, as negative as it was, it also didn't dissipate. And so it's a message of us to understand that we live in some sort of dual reality. And I spoke about this, I wrote a little bit about it in my bulletin article for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur in the shul. We live with a circle and a line. We live in the notion that lines move us forward. We're always going forward towards a redemptive moment, from here to there. And the span of Jewish history is a forward march till finally we have the opportunity to greet a Mashiach, a Redeemer, and things will change. But we also live within circles because we always have cyclical areas. We come back to Rosh Hashanah, we come back to Pesach, and we come back to Shavuot, we come back to Sukkot. It's not just a march forward. We come back to those same points. Why? Because the power of those points comes back to us. And that's, I think, this message the Or Chaim is telling us of Kachatzot Halayla. There are such ideas of a power that resides in the universe that we need to tap into. And once we tap into it, we figure out how to tap into it, who knows the blessings we may find. Thank you, everybody, for joining for tonight. I'm glad that you were here. Please feel free to unmute yourselves, and happy to share some thoughts and hear your reactions.
Just blow me away. Ooh.
That was wonderful, Rabbi.
Oh gosh,
I'm
Thank
writing
you.
my notes to my Haggadah because of you.
Oh, good. Really? These are the Parshat to take notes, to sit at your Seder table when you're not reading the Haggadah, you're eating your meal, you're schmoozing,
Yep.
you're talking. There's so much material here, so much.
unbelievable.
Thank you.
Phenomenal. It's great.
Rabbi.
Great.
Thank you for being here.
Question?
Yeah, does anybody have a question?
Yes,
Thank
Rabbi.
you very much.
You're very.
Hi.
Thank you, Rabbi Diamond.
I have a question.
Okay, is that you, Charlie?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you recognize me? The first time that Moshe told Paro that he wants to serve God with the people, he says, we're going for 3 days.
You mean to, yeah, that Moshe told
The first
Paro,
time.
right? Yeah.
Moshe told Paro, we're going for 3 days.
Right.
When did that idea of 3 days change to we're never coming back?
So that's a really interesting question. And there's a lot of discussion amongst the Parshanim. Was that honest? Did he really mean 3 days? Some Parshanim think yes, that's what he meant. And that he meant for 3 days and that they were going to come back. But it seems like it might have changed at the point where Paro refused at the Makat Bechorot to let the people go, at which point Hashem said, okay, that's it. I've given you all these opportunities. 3 days are all we're asking for. And I think the belief was, or the assumption was, that with 3 days, things would have changed. It would have been possible for Paro to sort of rethink his position. But his he doubled down, he refused to, and at that point, it moved from 3 days to goodbye. I was going to say goodbye, Charlie, but I didn't think that was a good answer with you at the other end of the question. Okay.
Can I ask one other one?
Yeah.
It's a very simple question. Why didn't Paro just lock Moshe up?
I'm going to answer it this way. I think it's arrogance. Because I think you don't get the satisfaction of defeating an enemy by locking him up. You want to defeat him in the battlefield. You want everybody to see. And locking him up, while deals with one aspect, it really doesn't bring you the satisfaction that you want. It's the idea, I want to beat you fair and square. I want everybody to see it happen. I want them to see I'm stronger than you, I'm smarter than you, I'm faster than you, whatever it is. Locking him up just doesn't do that. And I think that's really one of the reasons that went on here. And I think if you think about it, if you think about the fact that Paro just kept refusing and refusing and refusing, is an example of how the human mind, the human psyche, can be closed off to really thinking about stuff in a logical way. Logic should have shown Paro, let them go, because we're getting killed left, right, and center. We're not successful in anything. We can't duplicate things. We can't prevent things. Our cattle is getting killed. Our fields are getting killed in a certain way, objective way. I mean, even in World War II, the Germans surrendered at a certain point, right? They surrendered. Why did you surrender? Because at a certain point, you realize the war is lost. And Paro's inability to say those words, the war is lost, made it impossible for him, I think, to just tell his soldiers, lock him up, because he needed to take it to the end, which was to defeat Moshe and the God of Moshe somehow on this proverbial battlefield. And that was not in jail.
Rabbi, it's Simcha.
Hi, Simcha.
If I just one small comment, I remember coming across either a reading or a drasha where they say that really Paro didn't suffer and didn't got affected by all what was happening only at the very end. Choshech Hanmakat Bechorot.
No, that's not what the Torah says. That he was affected by all the other makot, the frogs, and that he was affected.
So he was affected.
Yeah.
But it was his pure arrogance. No, Toda. Thank you.
Yeah.
Rabbi, I have a question. It's Kenny. Nice to
Hi,
see
Ken.
you.
Yeah, you too.
Any thought or discussion that I guess Joseph, with the help of God, obviously, gave all these things to one Pharaoh, and then it all got reversed, but either through Moses, obviously through God, or by the, I don't know, crappy behavior of the next Pharaoh? Like, because when you go to the locusts, you're talking a horrible famine, and Joseph like prevented all that and stopped all that. It almost feels like it all gets rolled back.
Well, it does get rolled back when Paro refused to, like when Paro died and didn't acknowledge Yosef and what Yosef had done, and enslaves the Jewish people. When God sends Moshe to Paro has a chance. You know, it's interesting, Ken, if you take a look very carefully at the language of the Torah, these 10 plagues, makot in Hebrew, what was their purpose? It's clear from a really precise reading of the Torah, it was never considered to be punitive. It wasn't punishment. It was educational. What God was trying to do was to demonstrate his existence and his power to a nation that had not yet known God. It wasn't because of their bad behavior, it was because of their lack of knowledge. Laman Yedu, the Torah repeats this. I'm doing this so that the people will know me in the midst of their land. So the people might have known it when the time of Yosef, because Yosef he didn't hide his identity. He was a Hebrew. And when he first ascended to power, he made it clear, whatever I know because God told me this. Okay, so that was out in the open. But as Yosef died, he not only died, but so did that sort of presence of God in the land die with Yosef. So that Paro, without Yosef there, slowly reverted back to not really being mindful of that until finally they enslaved God's people. And God had to say, well, this is not what I want for my people, or not even for your people. But Paro was very obstinate and did not want to hear it. So in some ways, yeah, the whole goodness that Yosef brought was rolled back completely.
Thank you.
Good point.
Toda.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. I hope that you have something to think about around your Shabbos.
Woo.
Oh, Rabbi.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday at 8 p.m. Stay well, make it be a good week, a bracha week, a chesed week, and hopefully we'll all have a chance at one point in the future to learn around one big table together and drink a l'chaim.
Oh,
Amen.
amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
You're very
thank you,
welcome.
thank you.
Be well, everybody. Stay well.
Same to you.
Good night.
All right, I can't
Good
get
night,
unmuted.
everyone. Good night.
And
Good
I-
night, Eva. Good night, America. Good night. Good night.